Just devastating images coming out of Ahmedabad, the Air India 787 Dreamliner, crashing just moments after takeoff right into buildings near the airport.
Yeah, it was just horrific. And it wasn't just the crash itself, shocking as that was. Yeah. It immediately sent these, shockwaves, didn't it? Putting a huge spotlight, not just on the flight, but on Boeing and the whole situation with India's aviation sector.
Absolutely. That's Air India flight AIC 171. It went down June 12th. And the loss of life, just staggering. Over 270 people killed, both on the plane and tragically on the ground.
It's an immense human tragedy, first and foremost. But like you said, it also just raises these really deep questions about aviation safety, on so many levels. Manufacturing, regulation, oversight in a market that's growing so fast.
And that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. We've really gone through the sources, news reports, investigation updates, background notes to pull out the key information for you. We'll unpack what happened, look at the investigation, the response, then get into the whole Boeing 787 story, the company's issues, and zoom out to those challenges in India's aviation world.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
The goal is really just to make sense of it all, give you the context behind the headlines.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the timeline, the actual sequence of events. It happened incredibly quickly, didn't it?
Frighteningly fast.
So Air India 171, the Dreamliner, taking off from Ahmedabad. It was heading to London Gatwick, long-haul flight. Took off just before 1:40 in the afternoon, local time, on June 12th.
And it barely got airborne. The sources say it climbed, maybe 650 feet?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Very low. Before it just started descending rapidly. Some reports mention video appearing to show it losing speed almost immediately after takeoff.
Losing speed right after lifting off.
That's what some early accounts suggested. And in those first few seconds, the pilot managed to get out a Mayday call.
Wow. So they knew something was critically wrong instantly.
Seems that way. But ATC lost contact almost right after that call. And the crash itself happened at 1:40 p.m., barely a minute, maybe just over a minute, after it left the runway.
And it came down in Medhananagar, which is really close, only about 2 kilometers from the runway end.
Right into buildings, structures that were part of a medical college there.
See, casualties, it's hard to even comprehend. On the plane itself, 241 people died out of 242 on board.
Yeah, that's 230 passengers, 10 crew, and the 2 pilots. Just one survival from the aircraft.
We'll come back to that in a second. But the tragedy didn't stop there, did it? Because it hit a built-up area.
Exactly. Significant loss of life on the ground, too. Sources confirmed 5 doctors at the college were killed, plus other residents. So the total number, when you include everyone, is reported as at least 274, maybe up to 279 people. Just awful.
It really is. And amidst all that horror, you have this almost unbelievable story of the sole survivor from the plane.
Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, a British national. He was apparently in seat 11A.
And walked away with minor injuries, reports said.
Yeah, it's incredible. He apparently even made a video call to his father from the crash site.
Yeah.
Just saying, the plane crashed, he couldn't believe he survived, and he was worried about his brother who was sitting next to him.
Oh, his brother was next to him. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And there's that strange detail one source pointed out about seat 11A being the seat of a sole survivor in another crash years ago. Just a weird coincidence.
A very eerie footnote. So obviously the investigation kicked off immediately. India's AAIB, the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, they're leading it.
And they found the black box pretty quickly, right?
Very quickly. The first one, containing both the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, was recovered the next day, June 13th.
Which is just crucial. That's where the answers are, hopefully, what the plane was doing, what the pilots were saying.
Absolutely paramount. And because it's a U.S.-made plane, a Boeing, and there were international passengers, mainly British, it seems, there's international help, too.
Right. The NTSB from the U.S.
Yep. And the UK's AAIB are assisting. Plus, technical teams from Boeing and GE who made the engines.
The sources also painted a really grim picture of the work at the crash site itself. The level of destruction making identification incredibly difficult.
Yeah, requiring DNA testing for many victims. Just adds another layer of agony for the families waiting for news. You also saw India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, visited the site.
Okay, so that's the immediate aftermath and investigation setup. What about the regulatory response? India's Aviation Authority, the DGCA?
They acted fast, too. They ordered what they called extended surveillance and technical inspections, basically on all Boeing 787s flying in India.
How many is that?
34 in total. Air India has 33, and Indigo operates 1. Reports said 8 inspections were done already, and the rest were ordered with immediate urgency.
So checking the whole fleet, were there specific things they were looking for?
Yes, especially on the 787s with the same engine type as the crashed plane, the G&X engines. They mandated extra maintenance checks, focusing on things like takeoff parameters, the electronic engine controls, and fuel systems.
Okay. So an immediate focus on the fleet in India. But this is happening while the 787 is already under scrutiny globally, right?
Exactly. It's important context. The U.S. FAA, for instance, had already told airlines to inspect the forward pressure bulkheads on about 135 Dreamliners registered in the U.S.
Right. The bulkhead inspections, what was the concern there?
It's about potential manufacturing defects, small gaps in the structure that the worry is, over time, could potentially lead to fatigue cracks if they're not fixed. It's a critical part of the plane.
And Boeing knew about this.
Well, yeah, Boeing issued an alert requirements bulletin back in October 2024, and the FAA was moving to make those inspections mandatory. They proposed the rule in March 2025.
But Boeing's position has been that these issues, like the bulkhead gaps, don't actually compromise safety.
That's been their stance, yes. They say their data supports that the planes are safe to fly, despite these known manufacturing variations.
Okay, so that's a known issue. But how relevant is it to this crash? Did the plane break up or show signs of that kind of structural failure?
That's a key point. One source mentioned that initial observations from the crash site suggested the plane was, well, largely intact when it hit the ground. It didn't seem to break up in midair. So while those bulkhead issues are really significant for the bigger picture of Boeing's quality control.
Right, the broader manufacturing concerns.
Exactly. They're seen as less likely to be the direct cause of the specific accident based on that initial info. But again, it feeds into the wider scrutiny of going.
Which brings us squarely to Boeing itself, because this isn't the first time safety and manufacturing practices have been, under the microscope.
Not at all. The sources make it clear. Whistleblowers have been raising red flags about the 787 Dreamliner and other models for years.
And we're talking specific people, specific warnings.
Yes, definitely. Sam Falipur, a quality engineer, he warned about manufacturing flaws, these gaps in the fuselage sections of the 787 and the 777. Then there's the really tragic story of John Barnett.
The former quality manager at the Charleston plant.
That's him. He spoke out about substandard parts being used, finding tools and debris left inside planes, problems with the emergency oxygen systems, just deeply concerning stuff.
And he sadly passed away earlier this year during his legal battle with Boeing.
Found dead in April 2024, yeah. Officially reported as suicide, but obviously very troubling timing during his deposition. Then there's Ed Pearson, another former manager. He warned about intense production pressure, feeling it compromised safety at both the 737MX and 787 factories.
It sounds like a pattern. The sources mentioned that Netflix documentary too, Downfall, the case against Boeing.
Right, and its core argument was that after Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas, there was this cultural shift. Speed and hitting production numbers started to overshadow safety, and internal warnings got ignored.
What kind of specific things were alleged?
Things like cutting corners on the assembly line, misinspections, paperwork not being completed properly, workers apparently feeling pressure to skip steps, like one example given was not using shims correctly on landing gear fittings because it took too much time.
Shims seem small, but they're crucial for proper fit and strength, right?
Absolutely critical. And then there's the issue of foreign object debris, or FOD. Finding tools, metal shavings, bits of rags left inside the structure of brand new planes. That's seen as a direct result of rushing production.
That story about finding a ladder left inside part of the tail.
It's alarming, isn't it? And points to serious lapses, if true. There was also that specific account from Cynthia Kitchens, who worked at the Charleston plant.
She kept her own list of planes she was worried about.
Yeah, reportedly 11 Dreamliners. And she noted that 6 of them ended up being sold to Air India.
Wow. And her manager supposedly said something like, don't worry, they're going overseas.
That was the alleged comment, yes. They're not staying in America. Now, the plane that crashed, AIC-171, it was actually delivered from Boeing's Everett plant back in 2014, but key parts, the fuselage sections, were built in Charleston. So that anecdote feels very relevant.
It certainly raises questions. How has Boeing responded to all this publicly?
Well, the former CEO, David Calhoun, he testified before the U.S. Senate just recently, in June 2024. He did acknowledge past failures.
Acknowledge them.
Yes, and stated the company is taking action, trying to strengthen the safety culture, improve quality control, encouraging employees to speak up, be aviation safety advocates, was the phrase used.
But after the MAX disasters, these whistleblower accounts, and now this Air India crash, those reforms are really being put to the ultimate test, aren't they?
Absolutely. The scrutiny is just immense right now, and rightly so.
Okay, so we've looked at the crash, the plane, the manufacturer. Let's pivot now to the other major factor here, the state of India's own aviation sector. This crash puts it under, as one source said, renewed scrutiny.
Yeah, and another source used that phrase, India's aviation boom is flying on fumes, which really captures the underlying tension.
Flying on fumes, what does that mean in practice?
It means massive growth. India is set to be the world's third biggest aviation market very soon, maybe by 2026. But that incredible expansion is bumping up against some serious challenges.
Like what kind of challenges?
Well, first off, a surprisingly high number of planes are grounded. As of March 2025, sources said around 133 aircraft were out of service.
133 planes, out of how many total?
That's roughly 16% of the entire commercial fleet in India.
Wow, 1 in 6 planes grounded. That's significant. Why?
A big part of it has been engine problems, specifically issues with Pratt & Whitney engines. These were a major factor in Go First. Airlines collapsing, they had to ground almost half their fleet.
And Indigo, the biggest airline, they had issues too.
Yeah, Indigo was hit hard as well. Around 60 to 70 of their planes grounded, mostly due to a known defect with powder metal contamination in certain P&W engines. It's actually pushed Indigo to switch to CFM engines for a lot of their new plane orders.
So unreliable engines are a major headache. What else is straining the system?
Pilot shortages, described as a worsening shortage. You saw Akasa Air had to cancel a lot of flights last year because dozens of pilots just resigned suddenly.
So airlines are struggling to keep pilots.
Seems so. They're reportedly hiking pay significantly to try and stop pilots from leaving. It's a real constraint on growth.
And infrastructure, maintenance.
Regulation.
Concerns there too. Not enough maintenance facilities to keep up with the growing fleet size. Regulatory bottlenecks, sometimes slow processes, and some criticism of consumer protection standards. You might also remember that incident at Delhi Airport recently, June 2024, where part of the roof collapsed. That gets cited as another example of infrastructure worries.
And India has seen airlines fail before, right? Kingfisher, Jet Airways. Exactly. Kingfisher in 2012, Jet Airways more recently in 2019. Big names that went under, often due to financial instability linked to rapid expansion or operational problems. It shows growth isn't always sustainable.
What about Air India itself? It was privatized recently.
Yeah, taken over by the Tata Group in 2022. And there are signs of a turnaround, huge new plane orders, plans for big training academies. But even they face challenges. Labor issues, pilot shortages impacting their other airline, Vistara. It's not all smooth sailing.
So it's this picture of huge ambition, huge growth potential, but maybe shaky foundations. That phrase, scale without stability, seems to fit.
It does capture that tension well. But here's where it gets interesting. The sources also pointed out that, according to international audits, India actually scores pretty well on safety oversight.
Really? How does that work?
Well, the UN's aviation body, ICAO, they do these safety audits. And in recent ones, India has rated above the global average, especially high scores in things like operations and airworthiness.
That's higher than average.
Yeah, and the sources noted India's scores in those specific areas were actually higher than the U.S. or China's scores in their respective audits, although audits cover different things at different times. Plus, India has Category 1 status with the U.S. FAA, which it needs for its airlines to fly to the U.S.
So the official ratings look good, but the operational reality seems stressed. How do you square that?
It's complex, isn't it? Those ratings are often like snapshots. They look at the rules, the procedures, the documentation at the time of the audit. India's last big ICAO audit was 2022. They don't always capture the strain of day-to-day operations, especially during rapid growth. Can the system actually implement all those good rules effectively when it's stretched thin with grounded planes, pilot shortages, maintenance backlogs? That's the question. This crash will definitely lead to a reassessment.
Yeah, it makes sense. Ultimately, an event like this, especially with the Boeing scrutiny and the issues in the India sector, it's bound to affect how people feel about flying, right? Shake confidence.
Absolutely. It understandably creates anxiety. People need to trust the system. And that's why this investigation is just so vitally important. Getting that black box data analyzed is key.
Finding out the specific cause.
Exactly. Was the plane, the engines, maintenance, something the crew did or faced? A combination. We need those answers to understand what went wrong in those critical seconds after takeoff.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. It's a tragedy with so many layers. The awful human cost, first and foremost. Then the specific aircraft, the 787, the immediate actions in India. But also this much longer history of scrutiny on Boeing, the whistleblowers, the safety culture questions.
Right. And layered on top of that, the specific context of India's aviation booms. The grounded planes, the engine woes, pilot shortages, infrastructure strains, all happening alongside those positive, maybe slightly confusing international safety ratings.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, from the factory floor where the plane is built to the regulators, the airlines, the crews, the maintenance teams. It's this whole ecosystem.
It is. And for you, the listener, whether you travel a lot or just trying to understand these major events, it matters because it pulls back the curtain on that complexity. The system relies on safety, regulation, quality, and stability all working together.
Which leaves us with a pretty big final thought to chew on, doesn't it? As India pushes for huge growth in the skies, and as Boeing tries to rebuild trust in its quality and safety, what is that right balance?
Yeah, the balance between chasing growth, hitting targets, making profits, and the absolute non-negotiable need for safety on every single flight. Where does that balance actually stand today? This tragedy really forces us to ask that question.